I'm excited about this topic today. I have been a valiant pursuer of happiness over the last several years of my life, and it served me well. And so I'm excited to bring this information to you today as we kind of wind down our trainings for this month. So let me do a little bit of brief housekeeping before I get into the info. I would love to send you all a survey after the presentation today. And this survey is just a way for you to give me your feedback on this training, and also a space for you to give me suggestions for topics for future trainings. I definitely want to make sure that I'm providing you all with information that you find valuable and useful in your journeys as a caregiver. And the best way I can do that is through your input. So if you're willing to participate in that survey, please do me a favor and put your email address in the chat box. This is the only way I can get you the survey. So if you'd like to participate, please put your email in that chat, and I will send you the survey after our time together this morning, okay? Also, I'm going to kind of go through this information not super quickly, but I want to make sure I get it all in within the hour. It might take me a little bit less than that. So I just request that if you do have any questions or comments, you either put those in the chat or we can have a discussion afterwards. That way I can make sure I get through all the information for the recording that we will post on the website later on, either this afternoon or early next week. So if there's something that you missed or information you wanted to revisit, this will be placed on our alabamarespite.org website so that you can review it, share it, whatever you need to do. So don't feel like you have to get it all today. It'll be recorded for you to view at a later time if you need to. All right, so let me go ahead and share my agenda for today. So, oh, got more people coming in, great. So we're going to define happiness as best as we can. And we're going to go into some scientific studies about happiness, which I think is really fascinating. I can imagine if I were to say what was my dream job, researching happiness would probably rank up there pretty high. That and professional couch sitter. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the broaden and build theory and the counting kindness study. And these are two things that I found incredibly fascinating, and I'm excited to share that information with you. And then we're going to talk about why choose to be happy and how does that impact you and the world around you. So this may not be a topic directly linked to caregiving, right? It's just kind of good information for all human beings, whether you're a caregiver or not. But my goal at this training is to give you permission to be happy, even if the things around you are not so happy, right? A lot of times we hear the phrase choose happiness. How do we do that? Why do we do that? How do we get to that space where we can choose to be happy, even if our circumstances are not so happy? And so hopefully by the end of this, if you don't have the answers, it'll at least prompt you to contemplate this on your own, research it on your own, and really find out what does happiness mean to you and how can you incorporate that in your everyday life, okay? This is really going to be about giving yourself permission to cultivate a lifestyle that is prone to happiness, okay? Not that you're going to be happy 100% of the time, or you're going to be, like a robot that's never feeling any human emotions ever. This is just a starting point, right? For you to kind of integrate happiness or the opportunity to feel happy into your life as part of your whole wellness initiative, okay? All right, so I'm going to try to break it down a little bit here in the types of happiness that human beings can experience, okay? And of course, these are just broad strokes we're painting in. This is not a step-by-step way on how to be happy, but I think it's important to kind of break down what do we mean in this presentation, at least when we're talking about happiness, okay? And the best way to do that is to talk about the different types of happiness so we can really narrow down information, okay? So we all want happiness, right? But what kind of happiness do we want? So happiness is a very complex concept, right? And it really can't be pinned down to just one dimension or one definition, right? But there are 3 levels of happiness or types of happiness in psychology, and each level represents different aspects of the positive emotions that we strive for as human beings, right? So level 1 happiness. This represents momentary feelings of joy and pleasure, right? So this is short-term positive emotions that we can sometimes refer to as simple pleasures, right? So that can be maybe you had a really good meal, or maybe you have a really fun hobby that you enjoy that you get to participate in, or watching a good movie, or listening to really good music, things that you enjoy. Um, this is the first level of happiness, okay? And it's really easy to observe this level of happiness because of that immediate feeling of joy that we experience, right? So if you eat a nice piece of chocolate cake, wow, that's happiness, right? But we know it doesn't last forever, right? But these types of emotions that we feel in these simple pleasures are pretty easy to measure and compare, because when we scan the brain in these moments, certain parts of our brain are active when we experience these emotions, right? And so this level of happiness is pleasurable, but the good feelings don't last for very long. And we eventually return to our baseline mental state pretty quickly, right? So maybe you're feeling a little disgruntled, maybe not super happy. You do something that brings you a simple pleasure. You're happy in the moment, but then, that once that's over, it fades and you're right back to your baseline. Okay. So that's the first level of happiness. Level 2 happiness represents judgment about feelings. So this is sometimes referred to as well-being in this second level of happiness, and it's more thoughtful, and it requires an assessment that goes beyond those momentary feelings of level 1. Okay, so questions about happiness and well-being, if we were to take a survey, that's normally going to be at this level, right? So if you ask about how happy you are with your life in general, your answer is going to reflect a level 2 assessment of happiness. Okay, so this is also relative in the sense that if you compare your situation with other people, or how you felt in the past, right? This can be level 2. So I'm happier now than I was 5 years ago, or I'm not as happy now as I was 5 years ago. Okay, that's going to kind of be in this space, this level 2 happiness. And so if people are going to study happiness or well-being in psychology, this is the level that they're talking about. Okay, so for example, if you're reading research that says people in country A are happier than people in country B, then most likely it's going to refer to this level 2 of happiness, right? That's measured through various surveys, right? So how do you feel about your feelings, right? That's level 2 happiness. And then level 3 happiness, this is what represents a higher meaning of life, or flourishing, right? Fulfilling your potential. So the third level of happiness is fulfillment at a higher level, achieving your full potential. And this can also be seen as accomplishments with a higher meaning, right? So if you do something that brings meaning into your life, that's a level 3 happiness, right? Or self-realization, right? You know what you're made of, you know who you are, you know what you stand for, right? That's the third level of happiness, okay? And this is really related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's just basically what do we need as human beings to be happy, right? To reach self-fulfillment, okay? And so at the very bottom is our baseline needs: food, water, shelter, love, all that stuff, right? And then as you go higher, those higher levels of needs are going to be where that self-actualization is, right? So it's going to be physiological and safety needs at the beginning, needs for love, belonging, self-esteem, and then it goes up to being like to flourish and realizing your potential, okay? So this is obviously a little bit more difficult to measure than the other two levels. But people in higher levels of level 3 happiness live more harmoniously with their deeper values. And so that means they're going to have fewer inner conflicts, right? Because they often feel that what they do has meaning, okay? Or is contributing to a greater cause. So a lot of people find this level of happiness in their caregiving, right? Because they feel that what they're doing provides meaning, it serves a purpose, right? And so they can find level 3 happiness in caring for other people. And one could say that you are optimally happy at this level, okay? So in summary, the 3 levels of happiness: towards the lower level, happiness is more about your sensory experiences, immediate feelings, right? And they're very measurable. But towards the higher levels, happiness is more rational, reflective, and relative, okay? Can you be happy in all senses of the term all the time? Well, probably not. It's very unlikely or maybe even impossible to say that you can be happy in all three levels at the exact same time, because there's a trade-off between the different levels, right? So you can't have high levels of all three at the same time, or at least it's incredibly difficult to do so. And the reason is if you focus too much on level one happiness, those momentary joys or pleasures, then you're probably not going to work hard enough to reach your potential and succeed in your long-term objectives in life, right? If you're so busy chasing sensory happiness, you might not spend enough time really digging deep and finding out what's going to cause me to flourish, what's going to cause me to fulfill my life's potential, right? Um, so, but on the other hand, if you are focusing too much time towards long-term goals, you're probably going to forget to experience the simpler things in life, right? You're not going to stop and smell the roses if you're constantly on that grind to, reach those higher levels of fulfillment. So it's really about balance, right? It's about finding the right balance, accepting natural ups and downs and the different levels that just are inevitably part of our life, okay? So I hope I was able to clarify that for you today. So what we're going to talk about mostly, I think, is going to be those level 2 and level 3 happiness, or levels of happiness today, okay? So let's dive into the science of happiness. Yes, there are people who research this for a living, and I'm very happy that they do. So in order to help us understand happiness and alleviate suffering, neuroscientists and psychologists have started to investigate the brain states associated with happiness and components to consider in relation to well-being. Okay, so what makes humans happy? What makes humans, what kind of negates some of our suffering, right, through well-being? So while happiness in principle is very difficult to define because it is very subjective in a lot of ways, psychologists have made substantial progress in mapping the features of happiness, right? And neuroscientists have made comparable progress in investigating the functional neuroanatomy of pleasure, which is what's going on in the brain when we experience pleasure, right? And that's going to, of course, contribute importantly to happiness, and it's central to our sense of well-being. So there are people that are really trying to pinpoint what's going to make you happy, what's going to help reinforce your well-being, right? So we're going to go back in time a little bit. We're going to talk very briefly about Aristotle. So since Aristotle's time, happiness has been thought of as consisting of at least two aspects. So there's hedonia, which means pleasure, or eudaimonia, which is a life well lived. And I'm probably not pronouncing that properly, but it's a very, it's not my first language, right? But in contemporary psychology, these aspects are usually referred to as pleasure and meaning, okay? And positive psychologists have recently suggested a third component, which is engagement related to feelings of commitment and participation in life. Okay. So while it remains unclear how pleasure and happiness are linked exactly, it's pretty safe to say that at least the pathological lack of pleasure, right? So if you're experiencing like depression or dysphoria, that's really going to be an obstacle to you reaching happiness or ultimate optimal levels of happiness. Okay, so if you think about it, we are social animals, right? Human beings are very much about community and relationship. And social interactions with other humans is really fundamental and central to enhancing all the other pleasures that we experience. And that doesn't mean that if you're an introvert like me and you have a small circle of trusted friends that you cannot be happy. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm also not saying that if you are surrounded by people and you have a lot of social interaction, that that's automatically going to make you happy. Again, it's really just about that balance. And we are intensely social creatures. And so data indicates that one of the most important factors for happiness is social relationships with other people, whatever that looks like to you, right? So an example would be my oldest daughter is very extroverted. So the more friends and the more social engagement she has, the happier she is, right? I myself, I get drained around a lot of social interaction, but I do have relationships with people that contribute to my sense of happiness or well-being, as long as I'm seeing them when I need to see them, right? If I see them too much, that's not making me very happy, right? But I see them just enough to maintain that optimal wellness, okay? So it's going to look different for each person. Again, this is not a step-by-step guide on how to be happy. This is just a way that we can kind of illuminate what factors play into our ultimate happiness, okay? And social interaction, whatever that looks like to you, is a crucial component to that, okay? And I do know that as caregivers, it can be very isolating, and having those social engagements as regularly as you would like them to be may not be as possible for you. But even just meeting on these Zooms, coming to support groups, or even just having one or two close friends in your space that you can rely on and engage with, that's going to be a good starting point, if not enough, for where you are. Okay. So now we're going to shift into something called the broaden and build theory. And this one was kind of heavy for me just because there was a lot of academic language I wasn't really familiar with, just to be honest with you. And so I tried my best to condense it down into a space where it can be easily digested by the rest of us, right? People who are not researchers and don't do this for a living. So bear with me if it gets a little convoluted, I apologize. So the broaden and build theory, this was developed by a social psychologist, Professor Barbara Fredrickson, back in 1998. And she was really trying to focus on how positive emotions help us thrive and survive, right? Why did we as a species develop this need or this drive or this ability to feel positive emotions, right? What purpose does that serve in our thriving and our surviving as a species? And so part of the broaden and build theory is what we call the thought action repertoire. Okay. And so this is just referring to the actions we see and choose to take. Okay. So that's how many possibilities do we see on a horizon for us? And how many choices or how many actions can we take to lead us ultimately to that flourishing? Okay. So that's kind of what the thought action repertoire is. Okay. So according to this theory, positive emotions are more than just things that make us feel happy, right? They also help us to become more aware, more playful, more curious, which is a huge boon to our species, our ability to be curious, and discover new things, right? So when we have more positive emotions, we expand these possibilities, this thought action repertoire, okay? So in other words, the happier we are, the more flexible and creative we can be, right? So for example, think about someone who is struggling with depression, or maybe if you're like me, you've been in that space before, so you know what it feels like, right? Maybe their world is feeling pretty small, right? Maybe you can't help but isolate yourself, right? You're cutting yourself off from your social interactions. Maybe you're seeing opportunities seem like they're disappearing, right? So this is a narrowing that reflects that limited thought action repertoire, right? So over time, negative moods can become habits, and those habits can turn into traits, and those traits form part of your character. Okay, so this is how that shrinking thought action repertoire can be seen as or can cause a downward spiral. So I use this image here of this little rainbow spiral because think of the bottom is when you're maybe in a lower mood, right? You're depressed, you're not seeing the opportunities to get out of this funk, right? Things are very, very narrow. There's not a lot going on in that space other than feeling awful, right? But as you go up the spiral, it broadens, right? And so the broaden and build theory is like you can start from these very narrow spaces where you don't see a lot of opportunity for happiness, but then you can broaden those horizons as you become happier or as you heal from your depression. And then you look and see like, wow, the world is my oyster, right? The possibilities are endless. There are a lot of things I can do. And so you're not focused on the barriers as much as you are the opportunities. So I hope I was able to clarify that a little bit. So when we experience happiness, we develop valuable resources like knowledge, skills, and abilities, okay? And that can include personal, physical, intellectual, social, and psychological resources, right? Have you ever been in a funk and you say, I know what I got to do to get out of this, but I just don't want to do it, or I don't have the energy to do it, or I can't do it, okay? Just do it, right? Because the more you do it, the more this repertoire, these possibilities were brought in for you, okay? And so these resources are going to last longer past those initial positive emotions fade, and they can greatly aid in our long-term well-being and success, okay? And they can also help us to handle stress and tough situations better, and they provide us with stronger skills to manage those challenges, okay? So positive emotions play a vital role in helping us thrive, and their benefits go beyond just feeling good in the moment. They can also support our well-being for the long run, right? So the main takeaway here is that when we nurture positive feelings, it really is worth the effort, right? Because it's not only going to enrich our lives now, but it paves the way for personal growth in the future, right? Research has shown that positive emotions don't just reflect our resilience, they also help us build it up as a lasting resource for coping with life's challenges. And I think that's something we could all get a little bit or use a little bit more of, right? And the great news is that positive effects of these emotions can grow over time, and that boosts our overall sense of flourishing and happiness. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the counting kindness intervention. And I thought this was fascinating. So the counting kindness intervention is where they took a group of participants and they asked them to pay close attention to their acts of kindness towards others each day for a week. And then they are invited to keep track of every kind thing they did and share their daily totals, right? So, one of the most exciting discoveries from this study is just how closely kindness and happiness are linked in our daily lives. So, people who are kind tend to feel happier and have more positive memories. And it turns out that just by counting the acts of kindness for 1 week, people felt happier and more grateful. So, I know I've talked to you guys before about a gratitude practice, right? Where you kind of look around your life and the things that you have or things that, people are in your space or what have you, and you find things to be grateful for, right? And that can make you feel happier, right? Well, the same is true for kindness, it turns out. So if you are counting the kind acts that you do, that can actually make you happier, right? So if you need an excuse to keep track of all the good things you're doing for other people, here's a great one, right? So, research shows that much like gratitude, kindness is a powerful quality that boosts our overall well being. Findings suggest that there's a lovely back and forth relationship between kindness and happiness. So, similar to what we see with gratitude and happiness, right? So, if you are feeling in a funk and you go and do something kind for someone else, that is scientifically, according to research, going to give you a boost, right? Now, of course, I do have to stop and be mindful that sometimes we get into these people pleasing patterns, right? And we're always doing for others and we're not doing for ourselves ever. And this is not what I'm saying to do. Okay, I'm not saying abandon yourself in favor of kindness for other people. But when you have an opportunity to be kind, take it, right? And if you have an opportunity to acknowledge your kindness, take that opportunity as well. Okay. But again, this is all going to be about balance. Okay. Let's see here. So gratitude can alleviate our happiness by helping us appreciate those positive experiences. And that can help us to enhance our social connections. So when we feel positive emotions, they widen our thought patterns, right? They broaden our possibilities in our mind. And that helps build valuable resources like intellect, our physical resources, our social resources, our psychological resources, okay? And this can just foster more kindness and boost our happiness even further. So it's like on a loop and it kind of feeds into itself, okay? So when people experience positive emotions and create great social conditions through their own acts of kindness, it can lead to that upward spiral, right? And that's very lovely. It's pretty amazing that a simple act like counting how many times we're kind can have such powerful effects on us, but it does. Our brain is intensely complex, but it can be kind of hacked pretty simply, right? Which is good news for us. But additionally, people who scored higher in gratitude, they often enjoy greater well-being. They experience more intense positive feelings like happiness, vitality, hope, and they feel fewer negative emotions like depression, resentment, and envy. Okay. And studies in the past have also showed us that people who are unhappy, they may lean more towards negative and passive thinking styles, especially when they compare themselves to people who are happier, right? And I'm sure, maybe you guys haven't experienced depression in a clinical sense, but I think all human beings throughout the lifespan have the opportunity to feel kind of bummed or kind of blue or kind of sad or down. And so I hope you can kind of think back to those moments and say, like, yeah, I remember when I was in that space and my outlook did look pretty grim and I didn't see a lot of possibilities and I didn't see a lot of opportunities for me to get out of that space. But then you can think about times where you were happy and maybe there was more hope. And so the world was your oyster and your opportunities were broader, right, for you and your viewpoint. And so hopefully that's, resonating with you a little bit here. All right. So now we're going to talk about sympathy versus compassion versus empathy. Okay. And this one might seem a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Callous, right? And that's not where I'm trying to go. Okay. I'm just trying to define these things for you a little bit and to show you how they can benefit you in your wellness as components to happiness. Okay. So when someone is unhappy, it's a human tendency to kind of align your emotional state with theirs, right? Have you ever been in a space where you're feeling good, you're feeling happy, positive, what have you, and then here comes, grumpy Gus into space. He's got a rain cloud over his head and he's just, rah, 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 rah. And then all of a sudden you're feeling kind of, rah, 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 right? That ever happen to you? Happens to me all the time. And that's because we are just naturally wired to, kind of pick up on other people's energy, right? If we know somebody's in a bad mood, we know how to engage that person, right? If somebody's in a happy mood, we know how to engage that person, right? And so it's just human nature to be very aware of other people's moods as a survival skill, right? So when a situation is challenging or upsetting, we're taught to kind of sync our emotions with people who are suffering. So if you feel happy instead, if somebody's not happy and you're over here feeling happy, you might be judged as unfeeling or self-centered or lacking in compassion. Okay. However, you don't have to be unhappy or upset or stressed just because someone else feels that way. Okay. And this is why it's going to be important to know the difference between compassion, sympathy, and empathy. Okay. You don't have to have negative emotions just because you or someone else finds themselves in a challenging or dire situation. Okay. You have a choice about how you want to feel. So choosing to feel happy doesn't make you a bad person. And it doesn't mean that you're uncaring or selfish or self-absorbed. It just makes you a happy person. Again, remember, we're talking about that stage of happiness that is about your internal ecosystem, right? How I feel, it's like a character trait. I'm a happy person, even if my situation isn't happy, right? Or even if your situation isn't happy, I can still maintain the trait of happiness in my character because that's who I am as a person, okay? So empathy refers to feeling what another person is feeling. Okay, so that is when you almost take ownership of someone else's feelings, right? Mom's mad, I'm mad. Dad's sad, I'm sad, right? And so a lot of times you might hear people say, well, I'm an empath and I just feel what everybody else is feeling. We're all empaths, right? We're wired to do this. Some people more than others, right? Some people have it more finely tuned than others. But empathy definitely can catch you in a snare sometimes, right? Because then you aren't really in control of your emotions or your feelings. Whoever is in the room is in control of your emotions and your feelings, okay? So that's where it can be kind of tricky. So sympathy, on the other hand, from empathy, means you understand what another person is feeling, even if you aren't feeling it yourself, right? So if you think about if somebody passes away, you can offer them sympathy, right? So you're not grieving in the same way they're grieving, but you understand their grief and you're offering them some compassion or some support, right? But you're not necessarily taking ownership of that feeling. Does that make sense? And so compassion is when you want to take action to relieve the suffering of another person, right? So you can be empathetic and you can feel what other people are feeling and have no control over that. It's just, wherever the wind takes you. You can be sympathetic, which means I understand you're hurting, right? But you can be sympathetic and not feel compassion, right? Not feel moved to alleviate that suffering, right? I see you're suffering. I understand you're suffering. I feel bad that you're suffering, but I'm not doing anything to help alleviate that suffering, okay? Compassionate people, on the other hand, feel compelled to alleviate the suffering of other people, Okay, so there's a difference between the three. So many people who have a very strong empathetic sense, right? They've got strong empathy muscles. It can be very difficult to feel what other people are feeling all the time, especially if people in your space are experiencing a lot of suffering or just the ambient suffering throughout the world, right? If you watch the news for even 15 seconds out of the day, I mean, it can definitely knock you back, right? And make you absorb all of that ambient suffering that you're seeing on the television, right? But most people who are impacted in this way, they can work really, really hard to kind of shut out all the emotions they feel from other people. But that doesn't mean that they don't care, though, right? You can understand what someone is feeling and even relate to it from your past experiences, or even just by default as a human being. And you want to relieve their suffering, right? But you can still remain happy in this space, okay? I do it all the time. When I do my care chats or when I do sessions with people and they're unburdening and they're being vulnerable to me. And I really appreciate that trust, right? And it's a very sacred experience. But if I were to carry all of that with me as if it were my own, it wouldn't last very long, right? I'd burn out really, really quick. So I can remain happy even though I'm hearing tales of sorrow, right? It's because it's a character trait that I've developed over time, okay? And I can be sad for someone, but that doesn't mean I have to take ownership of their sadness or their grief, right? So now we're going to switch into a little bit deeper into this, right? Because I mean, maybe what I said to you might make you feel like, well, that just seems really kind of mean or heartless to say, well, I see you're suffering and I want to help alleviate that suffering, but I'm not feeling empathetic, right? I'm not crying when you're crying, that kind of thing. And some people do, and that's fine. But too many of us have been taught that we are not good people if we don't have empathy, right? But that isn't true. It's not helpful or healthy to have empathy for everyone all the time, right? Again, empathy is that taking ownership of someone else's emotions, okay? So we're told that if we're happy when other people aren't, there's a flaw in our character. Maybe we're selfish or we're not compassionate or we're not caring, right? But this isn't true, right? You know that's not true. Don't believe that. We can be happy in some really difficult situations and still be a good person, okay? Even if that's not your belief, looking at other people's experiences with a bit of intentional distance, right? This is where I end and where you begin. That can really help you become more objective, right? So you can intentionally choose how to respond to any situation rather than react, right? Um, so too often our reaction when bad things happen is to become unhappy or experience some kind of negative quote unquote emotion, right? But if we have a little bit of distance and a little bit of perspective, we can choose how to respond, and we can respond with happiness or at least a positive emotion like hope, right? Or peace or love, right? So a bit of an objectivity coupled with intentionality, that's going to allow us to choose our emotional state, to choose to be happy despite anything going on in our life or the lives around us, right? And it can help you to not get caught up in that wave of negative emotion. So if you think about in your caregiving journey, you are more than likely, especially if you're caring for someone who maybe has a disorder or a disease or diagnosis that is ultimately going to end their life, right? There's a decline in their health, and you're watching that in real time, right? And you're watching them struggle, you're watching them be stressed, you're watching them be sad, right? That can be really hard to maintain a level of happiness in that space, okay? And again, when I say happiness, I'm not talking about, you know, very superficial, happy-go-lucky, always got a smile on my face, even though my heart is breaking kind of a happiness. I'm talking about a character trait, right? So if you're a happy person and you're watching someone suffer, or you're in a space where somebody is being vulnerable and sharing their burdens with you, I'm not saying to say, well, just be happy and you'll be fine, right? You don't say that to somebody. But if you're a happy person, you're not going to be taken over by the wave of their negativity, and you can stand strong and offer hope to that person, offer peace to that person, and offer love to that person, okay? So it's going to work out good for you and them. So next, how does happiness and mental health change the world? Because again, it's all good and well for us to be happy for our own purposes, right? But this is really something that benefits our society as a whole, right? When we choose to be happy or when we choose to develop the character trait of being a happy person. So your happiness and mental health can change the world. So I love this quote, and I can't tell you who it was from. If you know who it is from, please let me know. But it says, let your smile change the world, but don't let the world change your smile. Easier said than done, right? I know that. And there are times where we just grieve for people we care about collectively, right? As a species, we can grieve for things going on around the world. Um, but again, we're talking about developing that character trait of happiness. So this is how happiness can change the world. This is how your happiness can change the world, okay? So bear with me. This might seem a little new agey to you, but there is science that backs this up, okay? So happiness isn't just an emotion, right? It's like an energy, right? Like an energetic force, and it can be measured. And that affects everybody around you, right? Again, think about when you have somebody in your space who's happy, right? They walk in the room and it just brightens the room, right? It's a breath of fresh air. They always seem to be positive and hopeful and happy, right? You're going to kind of feel some of that when they're in that space with you, right? And the opposite is also true, right? So we know that our emotions do have some kind of energetic uh, influence, right, on other people. That's how we're wired, right? We've got, I'm not sure if I have this in my notes or not, but I do want to share, we have these things in our brain that they refer to as mirror neurons. And it's something that we developed as social primates to kind of get cues from other people's moods and behaviors so that we can navigate that for safety, right? And so we do feel other people's feelings, whether we want to or not, okay? So when we're happy, we can affect the happiness of everyone around us, right? And that's how our happiness can change the world. It's a ripple effect, right? And so it's kind of a ripple effect giving happiness out to everybody else, right? So if you think about dropping a pebble into the water, that's going to give you those ripples that continue to spread, right? And that's kind of how happiness works or sadness works or what have you, right? Whatever people are feeling, you can feel it too. So when we're happy, it guides the thoughts we think and the words we use and the actions that we take, right? Happiness is how we show up in the world and it can change everything around us. So our happiness ripples to others, which builds happiness throughout our neighborhoods. And I think this is especially important for those of you caring for loved ones who have a dementia diagnosis. As the disease runs its course and your loved one's capacity to communicate or take in information changes, one thing that they're going to hold on to the very, very end is being able to read and judge moods, right? So if you're caring for a loved one who has dementia, especially in the middle to late stages, you be very careful of the kind of energy, emotional energy you're putting out, because you might be feeling a little stressed or rushed, right? In a space with someone who has dementia, and they're going to read that as they're stressed, they're rushed, they're unhappy. So I'm unhappy too, right? And I'm going to actually do a training on that next month. And so again, I'm not saying to slap on a happy face and lie to everybody around you, but just be mindful, right? There is an energetic output to your moods, and the people around you, even if they have dementia, will pick up on that. Okay, I mean, children will do the same thing, animals will do the same thing, right? Um, so even a simple happy smile can change another person's day, right? There are Harvard professors who have done research and they discovered that the happiness of an individual reaches 3 degrees of separation. So what that means is our level of happiness impacts the happiness levels of our friends and our friends' friends, right? So similarly, if you have a friend, relative, or neighbor who lives within a mile of your home and they become happy, this will increase the probability that you will be happy by 25%, right? Now, I'm assuming this is probably if people are engaging with one another in their neighborhoods. Like I don't really engage with a lot of my neighbors. So if, Johnny down the road is happy, I have no idea that he's happy, right? So it's not going to affect me in the same way as if me and Johnny had cookouts every weekend, right? So, of course, take this within reason. But this is a happy, energetic force that can be promoted out into our communities, okay? And this is a big impact that we can make every day on the world around us just by understanding our emotions and the effect that they have on the world around us, right? So emotional intelligence is what we refer to when we talk about knowing our emotions and how they affect other people. That's going to take time to nurture and foster every day. And again, it is like a practice, right? It has to be an intentional move on your part, how you respond, how you look at things, how you take in that information from the world. Okay. Our emotional state tends to react to the outside world, which is, unavoidable in a lot of ways. But with practice, we can stop reacting and start responding by being in control, maintaining control of our emotions and positivity, with positivity and compassion, right? And so I can use myself as an example. When I was younger, it was very easy for me to be inundated by the suffering of those around me, right? Now that I'm older, it's not that they impact me any less, but I feel a stronger foundation in those waves of emotion to where I can still stand and I can still offer hope and I can still offer love and I can still offer peace to people without being overwhelmed by the tide that they bring in. Okay. But again, I didn't start out that way, right? It took time and I had to be very intentional about it. Okay. So we're going to get a little bit more into these frequency ideas or these emotions and how they affect the people around us. Okay. So emotions do have a frequency, okay? So if many people feel unhappy or afraid, their emotions are going to impact the emotional state of those around them, right? That's just how we're wired. And ultimately, these emotions affect all of us who live on planet Earth, right? So think about even just during COVID, right? There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of what do we do next? How bad is this going to get, right? A lot of grief. There's a lot of loss in those spaces. So even if you maybe like didn't experience COVID as intensely as your neighbor did, you knew there was worldwide suffering, right? And so we were all impacted by that in some way. Okay, so we can just take that as an example in our real lives to see how this is true, right? So pandemics, natural disasters, war, terrorist attacks, massive accidents, right? These can send waves of negative emotions around the world, right? Think about if you were around when the Twin Towers were attacked, right? Most of us weren't there, but we felt it, right? We were impacted greatly by that suffering, by that tragedy, okay? Um, and so this, if we choose to feel the anger and the sadness or the fear or the mistrust, we're just adding to the wave and the size of that wave and that's intensity, okay? But by choosing to be happy, we help lessen the effect of all those negative emotions, okay? So if you need a reason to be happy, that's a good one. Now, again, as a therapist and as a human being, I always have to add these little disclaimers that I'm not advocating that we pretend we're not affected by things that are affecting us, right? That we don't ignore these uncomfortable feelings in lieu of pretending to be happy, okay? You can feel those feelings and process those feelings and not take ownership of that suffering and that grief, okay? And you can be moved to alleviate that suffering and that grief and still be a happy person. Okay. But you can definitely say, wow, this affected me in a negative way. I felt really sad about this. That's okay. Okay. So I'm not advocating for you to just pretend to be happy all the time. Okay. Um, so moving on, if you don't exercise your ability to choose your emotions, though, you're going to allow that internal state to be dictated by what's going on around you, right? Those external situations, those people, circumstances, things like that you can't control. But if you exercise your power to choose, then you get to decide how you feel at any given moment, right? Yes, this is sad, and I can either choose to be overwhelmed by that sadness, or I can choose to be proactive and alleviate that suffering, right? So you're still experiencing the emotion, you're still experiencing the feeling. It's just what are you going to do in response to that? Okay. So choosing to be happy is a choice, right? For you and for other people. So it's easy to focus on the fact that our current world can maybe make us feel a little anxious or sad or maybe even angry, right? Sometimes. And it might even seem kind of callous to smile or to spout hopeful or optimistic words in those spaces, especially if it's someone who maybe has lost a loved one or a job or something that meant a lot to them, right? But you don't help yourself or anyone else by being miserable, right? You can see somebody's in misery and you can see someone's hurting and they're in pain and still choose to be happy, okay? And you don't need to be unhappy despite any of the programming that we've received, right? That says that we have to be unhappy in specific situations, right? No rule says that you have to, okay? And as you can hopefully start to kind of develop this thought, like it's good for us to be happy in spaces where maybe people are looking for hope and they're looking for happiness. They're looking for something positive to anchor to. Okay. And that could be you, right? Because you built this character trait of happiness. So, why choose happiness, right? I kind of touched on this already, but I want to talk a little bit about this quote here. It says, "Our gift to the world comes as much through our being and presence, our smile and touch, our sense of possibility and the mystery of human life, as it does in the specifics of what we do." So this is a quote by a Buddhist monk and psychologist named Jack Kornfield. And he's basically saying that cultivating a joyful spirit can actually help not only us, but the people around us, especially when things are hard. Okay. So this is a lovely sentiment. And it also seems to be supported by science. So study after study shows that well-being, either in a positive mood or recognizing that you have a good life, right? That's kind of your well-being here. That benefits those in our social sphere, whether we're talking about our families, workplaces, school, or society at large, right? When we're happy, we're better relationship partners, right? We're more kind and we're more helpful in our communities, and we're more productive in our workplaces when we're happy, right? And this can all really be useful during times of crisis. And our well-being is contagious in social circles. So researchers Nicholas Christakis, I think is how you pronounce his name, and James Fowler, they found that in social networks, happiness can be contagious, again, up to 3 degrees of separation from its initial source, which is you, right? So when you're happy, the people you're connected to tend to be happier, and the friends of those friends and the friends of those friends of those friends, right? They all become happier, okay? This happiness contagion can also happen in school settings. So one study found that a student's individual well-being and their happiness at the end of the school year partly depended on how happy and satisfied with their classmates or the classmates were earlier in the year, right? So, and it can happen at home or in families or workplaces too. So why is that? Well, it turns out that our brains are pretty attuned to those emotions of others around us, like we talked about earlier. And this is, yep, I did have this in my notes. So this is what we're talking about, this complex neural system referred to as mirror neurons, okay? So we experience the feelings of others inside of ourselves, right? So it's when we smile, we can make others people smile, right? When we laugh, other people can laugh, right? You ever, see a video or be around a laughing baby, it's really hard to not be happy in that space around a happy baby, right? But as long as we're in some kind of contact with people, physically or even online, our good feelings tend to spread to them, okay? So studies suggest that there's some kind of reciprocal relationship between well-being and social bonds that we talked about before, and it strengthens both of them. So it's not only good for you, but it's also good for each person that you're connected to. And this helps us to engage in social problems around the world. So taking care of our own well-being may give us those emotional resources that we need to help other people around us, right? So I'm going to throw another study in here because I love to do that. One study found that happier people are more likely to care about the problems of the world and to take action to alleviate that suffering, right? So happier people tend to be more compassionate. And this could be because maybe they have more personal agency or energy to do so, right? If you're not the one suffering, you have the reserves to kind of alleviate the other suffering of other people. And another study in Germany found that happier people tended to be more involved citizens. So that means they voted, they volunteered, they participated in community activities more so than less happy people. Probably because they were more optimistic, right? And trusted other people more, right? So, if you were optimistic about the outcomes or your community's potential, you're more likely to engage in meeting those goals with your community. Whereas if you are not as happy and you've got that very narrow view, right? You don't have that, thought action repertoire very wide there. And so you're like, what's the point? What's the use? Why should I even participate if it's not going to go anywhere, right? So you can kind of see how that matches up, right? Let's see. Another study in Latin America found that happier people tended to vote more and that happiness was likely the cause, not the effect of voting. So they were happy and that's what prompted them to vote, not that they voted and that's what made them happy, right? The happy people were more engaged in the voting process in their communities than the less happy people. And I would argue to say it's probably because if you have a character trait of happiness, your default setting is hope. Whereas if you have a character trait of pessimism, your default is not going to be hope, right? You're going to feel hopeless. So you're not going to participate in activities the way that happy people will. Okay. So, of course, saying that your well being helps others isn't meant to pressure you to be happy all the time, right? That's not possible. And it's probably going to be kind of creepy if you just walk around with this plastic smile on your face all the time, right? But it's good to remember that all of our emotions are useful under certain circumstances, right? Including the so called negative ones, such as fear. It keeps us from taking unnecessary risks, right? Or sadness can help us to signal to other people that we need comfort, right? And this doesn't mean that we should simply put on a happy face when we don't feel happy. Accepting those negative emotions is actually useful for our well-being, while repressing them generally isn't. Okay, so we don't want to swallow down our sadness and our pain and act like there's nothing wrong, right? If you're feeling hurt and you need comfort and you need support, you absolutely have a right to let those people in your space know that, right? Because maybe somebody who maybe isn't experiencing what you're experiencing, who maybe has a happy trait or character trait, can come into your space and give you that support you need while you heal from, whatever sadness or hurt that you're feeling, right? But these findings do suggest that taking care of our well-being isn't really a selfish pursuit, right? We can all try to do this as individuals, and this can help the well-being and the happiness of all the people around us, right? So practicing keys to more sustained well-being, like gratitude, mindfulness, seeking out exposure to awe, right? So looking at, a wonderful landscape, right? Maybe you're a hiker like I am and you go out and you see a waterfall, right? That's how I experience a lot of awe, and that's good for your well-being, okay? This can help us to build societies that promote wellness, right? When we all are engaging in these activities, mindfulness, gratitude, awe, compassion, right? That's going to positively affect our communities, right? And when we nurture our well-being, we'll be helping those around us to cope, and that contributes to a better world for all people. So there's several possible ways that good feelings can contribute to relationship building in both the short term and the long term. So here are some positive or some possible ways that happy people can affect their communities, right? So happy people are more likely to engage with others and be more social. When meeting new people, happier people tend to have more substantial interactions and feel a greater sense of commonality than less happy people, right? I can relate to you, you can relate to me. Happy people are less likely to have conflicts with others and are better at negotiating differences, right? So if you are a happier person and you get into a conflict with another person, studies say that you are going to be better at negotiating or finding common ground with that person, right? Or coming to a conclusion and mediation that works best for both of you. Happy people may be more kind and helpful towards other people. And other people find it rewarding to be around happy people, right? So this suggests that, again, that there's a reciprocal relationship between well-being and social bonds, and that strengthens both of them, right? They feed into each other. And that's not only good for you, but it's good for everybody that you're connected to, right? Our well-being is going to help us engage in social problems in the world, in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces, right? And so taking care of our own well-being may give us those emotional resources that we need to help those around us. And I will go on next week on a training about the 7 dimensions of wellness to kind of help you get like a blueprint or some ideas to kind of start that well-being, that wellness practice in your life so that you can be more resilient to negative emotions, whether they're yours or other people. Okay, so I hope you tune into that next month. So this is my last slide, and it says how to feel happy no matter what. Now, I will be honest with you. There are times where you just can't feel happy, right? And I know that, you know that. And I'm not advocating for us to say that we're going to be happy even if, something horrible and tragic happened to us, right? But we can choose our response based off of our character trait of happiness. Okay. So choose happiness, right? And that's not just, hey, well, you're sad. Have you thought about being happy? Thanks. I never thought of that, right? That's not what I'm saying. But happiness is a choice. So when we feel sad, angry, or afraid, we can consciously choose to be happy. And happiness could be just how do we respond to these feelings, right? Do we seek out social supports? Do we, maybe minimize some things on our to-do list so that we have time for rest, right? That kind of thing. Um, Focus on things that make you happy. So how do you feel happy when you're actually sad, angry, or afraid? Pay close attention to where you focus your thoughts, right? So we know that our thoughts create our emotions. And so if we're experiencing negative emotions, our thoughts are on something that produces that feeling. So instead, intentionally think about something that makes you happy. Again, within reason, right? If you just lost a loved one and it's been 3 days and you're in the throes of that grief, I'm not saying choose to be happy and just focus on things that make you happy. No, process that grief, honey. Okay. Find someone to support you through that. But there are some times where we are just in a negative mood and nothing tragic has really happened to us. We're just feeling disgruntled and we're really focusing on those sticky thoughts, right? That rumination, those distortions, right? We're talking bad to ourselves. We're picking on ourselves. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Just try to shift your focus to something positive. Be focused on your gratitude practice, right? That kind of thing. Be sympathetic, not empathetic. Remember, sympathy is where you are moved by someone's feelings. You can relate to their feelings, you can understand their feelings, but you're not taking ownership of those feelings. And that's what empathy is. Okay. So instead of trying to feel what another person feels, try to understand what they feel. Ask them questions about what they're experiencing, right? Get to that point where you can feel sympathy or compassion, but don't put yourself in their shoes and say, these are now my feelings. Okay. Number 4, be compassionate, right? So when we understand things, with understanding comes that desire to be of service, right? To put people out of their misery. That probably isn't the best term because we often think about Old Yeller in that space, but to take somebody out of that space where they're always focusing on their misery, right? So we can definitely help in those spaces the best way that we can, make them feel better, right? And as a result, we're going to feel better too, right? Feel happy, and then you can help other people feel happy too. Okay. But a word of caution, don't focus on the outcome, right? Some people like to stay unhappy, and that's okay. That's their choice, right? But you can still feel good about your efforts, right? Have you ever had somebody who's just like super negative Nancy, and any, at a girl you try to give them, or any positive thing you try to throw their way, or, try to lighten the mood or what have you, and they're just determined to be grumpy and they are determined to be miserable, right? That's okay. Okay. You don't have to focus on making them happy, but you can just focus on how you're going to respond to their emotion, to that frequency, and choose to be happy yourself. Okay. And this is really important. I think the last one, do what makes you feel good, right? I think oftentimes in our culture, we like to almost shame our delight, shame our pleasure, shame our joy, right? Rest is something we do when everything else has been completed, right? But that's not true, right? And we can take a break from things like the news or even caregiving, right? You can take those respite breaks, have that friend over for coffee, right? Um, Take breaks from even grieving, right? Because if you're grieving constantly and there's no time for you to come up for air, right? Um, Try to take breaks when you can and find things that make you feel good. Okay. It could even just be, having a nice, comfortable pair of jammy pants on, right? Or having your favorite tea or something like that. It doesn't have to be expensive or extravagant, right? Just taking moments for those pleasures is going to go a long way in maintaining and cultivating that character trait of happiness, right? You are allowed to have fun. It's healthy to have fun, even if you're in a tragic situation, right? Even if you're in the swells of grief, it's okay to seek out things that make you feel good, okay? Many mystical traditions also advocate for doing things that make us feel happy, right? Or even experiencing that joy, right? The state of happiness increases our ability to connect with our higher selves or our creator or the universe, whatever you want to call it. So in other words, being happy, according to a lot of mystical traditions, is a high spiritual state, right? Again, we're talking about that cultivating that character trait of happiness, not those fleeting sensual pleasures that we, chocolate cake and all that good stuff, right? So finding that flourishing, being in that space, you're cultivating a life that is conducive to happiness, right? That can definitely be seen as a high spiritual state. So that's my info for you. This is my contact information. If you want to talk about this or other topics, or you need to reach out for a care chat, you can call me or send me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I do travel a lot, so if it takes me a couple days to get to you, please don't take it personally. I just haven't gotten your email or your phone call yet, okay? And then I also want to leave you with my sources. And if you want this page for the sources, please let me know and I'm more than happy to email it to you. And this will just give you a nice spot for you to kind of continue your own research on happiness and how you can cultivate that trait in your own life. I was going to try it. There we go.